Black sheep siblings. What family secret did you uncover that explained why you were always treated differently? I was 23 when I finally understood why my parents treated me like a stranger living in their house. Growing up, I was the family ghost. While my brother Theo got praise for B's, I'd get lectures for A-minuses. When my sister Vera broke Dad's golf clubs, somehow I'd end up grounded. Christmas morning meant watching them open expensive gifts while I got clearance items still bearing price tags. You're just more independent, Mom would say when I asked why they never came to my school plays. Theo and Vera need more support. The favoritism was so obvious it hurt. Theo got a car for his 16th birthday. A shiny red Honda Civic with a bow on top and fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror. I got a used bike from Goodwill with a wobbly front wheel and rust spots on the handlebars. Vera's college tuition was paid in full, plus spending money for sorority dues and spring break trips to Cancun. I worked 3 jobs to afford community college: dishwasher at Denny's from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cashier at Target on weekends, and babysitting for neighbors who paid me in crumpled bills and leftover pizza. When I made Dean's List 3 semesters in a row, they forgot to congratulate me. The certificates sat on my desk unacknowledged. When Theo barely passed freshman year with a 1.8 GPA after partying away his scholarship, they threw him a "you'll do better next time" party, complete with his favorite chocolate cake from the expensive bakery downtown and a pep talk about finding his passion and not letting setbacks define him. I stopped asking why years ago. It was easier to accept that I was just the unwanted kid they felt obligated to keep. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me, something that made me impossible to love the way they loved Theo and Vera. Maybe I was too serious, too needy, too much work for parents who just wanted easy kids. The breaking point came during Vera's college graduation ceremony in May. The whole extended family flew in, something that had never happened for any of my achievements. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, even neighbors from our old street. Everyone gathered to celebrate her communications degree from a community college that she'd barely earned after 6 years of partying, changing majors 4 times, and taking remedial math twice. Meanwhile, I'd graduated summa cum laude from medical school 3 months earlier, after 7 years of working full-time to pay for it. They'd sent a text message at 11:47 p.m. Congrats? Not even an emoji. No party, no family gathering, no acknowledgement that their oldest child had just accomplished something they claimed to value. The graduation ceremony itself was a study in contrasts. Vera walked across the stage to thunderous applause from our section. Family members stood up, whooped, took pictures with professional cameras. When she got her diploma, Dad actually had tears in his eyes. I thought about my own graduation, where I'd sat alone in the family section while my classmates celebrated with dozens of relatives. Mom and Dad had been too busy to attend. Theo had a baseball game. Vera had sorority obligations. I'd taken a selfie with my diploma and posted it on social media, where it got 12 likes. That night at the graduation dinner, held at Romano's, the fanciest Italian restaurant in town, the same place where I'd worked as a hostess junior year, I was relegated to the kids' table despite being older than half the adults. My 11-year-old cousin Braden was explaining his Little League batting statistics while I picked at overpriced chicken parmigiana, wondering why I'd even bothered coming. The conversation at the main table was all about Vera's bright future in marketing, her potential for rapid advancement, how proud everyone was of her perseverance. I listened to them plan her post-graduation trip to Europe, a 3-week tour through Italy, France, and Spain that would cost more than I made in 6 months. She's always been such a bright light, Aunt Patricia gushed, gesturing with her wine glass. Remember when she was little and used to put on those elaborate plays for us during holidays? I remembered those plays. I'd been the one writing the scripts, staying up late to create costumes from bed sheets and cardboard, directing the other kids, solving technical problems when the makeshift curtain fell down. Vera had just stood center stage in whatever princess costume I'd made her, and soaked up the applause while I operated the flashlight spotlights from behind the couch. And she was always so creative with her Halloween costumes, Uncle Robert added. Remember that incredible fairy princess outfit when she was 8? I'd spent 3 weeks hand-sewing that costume, learning techniques from YouTube videos, using money from my allowance to buy materials. Vera had worn it for 2 hours, complained it was itchy, and demanded I fix it. The photos from that Halloween showed her glowing in the center of every shot, while I stood in the background in my hastily assembled witch costume made from a black sheet and a pointed hat from the dollar store. My great-aunt Dolores, 3 glasses of wine deep, started scrolling through old family photos on her phone with that sentimental drunk way old people do at family gatherings. "Oh, look at this precious one," she slurred, shoving the screen toward me. "Your mom was so young when she had the twins. 22 and already handling 2 babies like a pro. Look how tiny they were." I stared at the photo. Mom in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding 2 babies. Theo and Vera as newborns, tiny and red-faced and perfect. The timestamp read June 15th, 1998. Dad stood beside the bed beaming, holding a balloon that said, "It's twins." The room was filled with flowers and gift baskets. "Where am I?" I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. Dolores squinted at me like I'd asked her to solve advanced calculus. "You weren't born yet, honey. This was when the twins came home from the hospital. Such a happy day for the whole family." My stomach dropped like I'd swallowed ice water. "What do you mean? I'm older than them." I was born in October of 1997. The entire table went dead silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Uncle Robert put down his wine glass with a sharp clink that seemed to echo. Cousin Michelle's mouth fell open. Mom's face turned white as copy paper. Dad started frantically signaling Dolores to stop talking, making slashing motions across his throat like he was trying to cut her off before she could say something catastrophic. But it was too late. Oh shit, Dolores whispered, suddenly stone sober, her eyes wide with horror. I thought you knew. I thought everyone knew. I mean, you don't look anything like them, and the age thing never made sense, but I assumed. That's when I realized my entire life had been built on a lie. The room felt like it was spinning, tilting on its axis. 23 years of feeling like an outsider suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. The way family photos were arranged with me slightly apart from everyone else, like an afterthought. The way relatives would sometimes stop talking when I walked into a room, conversations dying mid-sentence. The way I'd never quite fit, never quite belonged, no matter how hard I tried or how perfectly I performed. I excused myself to the bathroom on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and called my friend Quinn, who worked at a DNA testing lab downtown. I need a favor, I said, my voice trembling so badly I had to repeat myself. And I need it fast. What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost. I think I might be one. Quinn had been my roommate in college, the one person who'd noticed how differently my family treated me during Parents' Weekend. She'd been the one to point out that I didn't look like any of them, that our mannerisms were completely different, that they seemed to barely tolerate my presence while doting on Theo and Vera. Are you asking what I think you're asking? She said carefully. I need to know if I'm related to them. Any of them. I can get samples. Quinn agreed to run an emergency DNA comparison if I could get hair or saliva samples. I spent the rest of the dinner collecting evidence like a detective at a crime scene. Hair from Theo's jacket when he hung it over his chair. DNA from Vera's lipstick when she left it on the table. Even a water glass Dad had been drinking from. I felt like a criminal in my own family, stealing genetic material to prove what my heart had always known, that I didn't belong. 3 days later, Quinn called with results that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. You need to sit down, Quinn said when I answered the phone. I was already sitting in my tiny studio apartment, but my legs felt like jello anyway. The apartment was a converted garage that I rented for $800 a month, barely large enough for a bed and a desk, but it was mine. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through the drywall, but at least no one there treated me like a burden. You're not biologically related to any of them, Quinn said gently. Not your parents, not your siblings. 0 genetic markers match. It's not even close. You're not related to them at all. You're not adopted family, you're not a distant cousin. There's no biological connection whatsoever. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto my small dining table, a folding card table I'd bought at a garage sale. I'd suspected something was off since Dolores's wine-fueled revelation, but hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow to the chest, like someone had reached into my ribcage and squeezed my heart until it stopped. Are you there? Quinn's voice sounded far away. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. I'm here. Do you want me to run the samples again? Sometimes there are lab errors. No, I said quietly. It makes sense. It explains everything. That evening, I drove to my parents' house with the DNA results printed out in triplicate, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I'd made the 20-minute drive thousands of times, but tonight it felt like crossing into enemy territory. The house looked the same as always. A modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a garden that Mom tended obsessively. The same house where I'd spent 18 years feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The same house where my bedroom had been converted into Vera's walk-in closet the day after I left for college. Mom was in the living room folding laundry, humming softly to herself, the same tuneless melody she'd hummed my entire childhood, usually while ignoring my attempts at conversation. Dad was reading his newspaper in his worn leather recliner, glasses perched on the end of his nose, surrounded by sections he'd already read. Theo was sprawled on the couch playing video games with noise-canceling headphones, and Vera was painting her nails on the coffee table, bottles of polish spread around her like art supplies, the picture of domestic normalcy that had never quite included me. We need to talk, I said, placing the DNA results on the coffee table next to Vera's nail polish collection. The humming stopped abruptly. The newspaper lowered slowly. The video game paused with the electronic beep. Even Vera looked up from her nails, her face scrunched in irritation at being interrupted. Mom's face crumpled like a paper bag that had gotten wet. Dad's newspaper fell to the floor with a rustle that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. How long were you planning to lie to me? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Honey, it's complicated, Dad finally said, his voice hoarse and uncertain. Try me. I have time. Theo and Vera exchanged a look, the kind of look that told me they'd known all along, probably since they were old enough to understand family dynamics. Of course they had. I was the only one who'd been living in the dark about my own life, the only one who'd believed the fiction that we were a real family. Can we talk about this privately? Mom asked, glancing nervously at Theo and Vera. No, I said firmly. They're part of this lie too. They've known, haven't they? Vera had the grace to look ashamed. Theo kept staring at his hands. That's when they told me the truth, or at least their version of it. I wasn't their daughter. I was their niece. My biological father was Dad's younger brother, Uncle Mitchell, the family black sheep who'd been dead since I was 2 years old. Everyone had whispered about Mitchell at family gatherings, talking about his drug problems, his criminal record, his inability to hold a job or maintain relationships. He was the cautionary tale, the example of how not to live your life. My biological mother was a woman named Crystal who'd supposedly abandoned me with Mitchell when I was 6 months old, according to their story. Mitchell showed up at our door one night with you in a car seat, Mom said through tears that seemed genuine, but felt 23 years too late. It was raining, and he was high. You could tell just by looking at him. He was babbling about needing to get clean, about having to do right by you. He said Crystal had left and he couldn't take care of you anymore. We were going to call social services the next morning. Dad added, his voice getting stronger as he warmed to his narrative. But then Mitchell died 3 days later from an overdose in some motel room across town. We'd already been caring for you. It seemed easier to just keep you. You were so little, and you'd already been through so much trauma. Easier? I stood up, rage building in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. You mean cheaper than going through legal adoption procedures? That's not fair, Mom protested, standing up too. We gave you a good home. We raised you as our own. Fair? I laughed, and it came out bitter and sharp. You want to talk about fair? You treated me like garbage for 23 years because I reminded you of your junkie brother. Dad's face hardened, and I saw a flash of the coldness I'd grown up with, the disapproval that had shadowed my entire childhood. Mitchell destroyed everything he touched. We gave you a chance at a normal life. You gave me a roof and food and emotional neglect. I shot back. That's not the same thing as a normal life. I thought about all the times I'd wondered why I felt different, why affection felt conditional, why I had to work so hard for scraps of approval that came naturally to Theo and Vera. All the family photos where I stood slightly apart from everyone else, always positioned like an afterthought or a last-minute addition. All the birthday parties where Theo and Vera got themed celebrations with hired entertainers and elaborate decorations, while I got grocery store sheet cake and a half-hearted rendition of Happy Birthday sung by people who acted like they were doing me a favor. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why let me spend my entire life wondering why I didn't fit? We were going to, Mom said, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was already damp. When you turned 18, then when you graduated high school, then college. It never seemed like the right time. There was always something. Graduation, holidays, your job interviews. We didn't want to disrupt your life, so you decided to just lie forever? Let me wonder why I felt like a stranger in my own family. We were protecting you, Dad said. Like that justified everything. Like protection meant the same thing as love. From what? The truth? My own identity? Vera finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. We wanted to tell you. Theo and I talked about it all the time. We felt bad keeping it secret. But you never did, I said, turning to look at her directly. You let me wonder my entire childhood why I didn't belong. You watched me try to earn love that was never going to come, and you said nothing. Theo shifted uncomfortably on the couch, finally looking up from his hands. It wasn't our secret to tell. Mom and Dad said they'd handle it. Then what was it like? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you all conspired to make me feel like an outsider in the only family I've ever known. That's when Mom said something that changed everything, something that revealed the true depth of their deception and cruelty. We saw him in you sometimes, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell's selfishness, his destructive tendencies, his need for attention. We thought if we were stricter with you, if we didn't coddle you like we did Theo and Vera, maybe you wouldn't end up like him. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I stared at her in disbelief, trying to process what she'd just admitted. You emotionally neglected me because you thought I might inherit personality traits from a man who died when I was 2 years old? We did our best with a difficult situation, Dad said defensively. Your best sucked, I said flatly. Your best involved treating a child like she was tainted by association with someone she never knew. Your best involved withholding love and affection from a little girl who just wanted to belong somewhere. I walked toward the door, then turned back with one more question burning in my throat. Do Theo and Vera know about my biological mother? About what really happened to her? The silence answered everything. They've always known everything, haven't they? Mom nodded miserably. That explained so much. The way they'd exchange meaningful glances when I talked about family resemblance or genetic traits. How they'd sometimes call each other real siblings when they thought I wasn't listening, creating an exclusive bond that specifically excluded me. The inside jokes I was never part of. The shared memories that predated my existence in their lives. The way they could communicate without words, while I remained perpetually on the outside. I'd been the only one in the dark about my own life. I left that night and stayed with Quinn while I figured out my next move. She lived in a converted loft downtown, the kind of space I'd always dreamed of living in, but could never afford because I'd been working to support myself since I was 16, while Theo and Vera got allowances and had their expenses covered. Quinn's place had exposed brick walls, huge windows, and furniture that matched, luxuries I'd never been able to afford. She made us dinner. Real food, not ramen or whatever was on sale, and listened while I processed everything. So what now? She asked, handing me a glass of wine that probably cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. I'd been thinking about that all week. Part of me wanted to cut them off completely, change my name, move across the country, and pretend none of them existed. But another part of me, the part that had spent years trying to earn their love, wanted to understand more about where I actually came from. I need to find out about my real parents, I said. Quinn raised an eyebrow. Your dad's brother is dead and supposedly your mom abandoned you. Are you sure you want to open that door? Some family secrets are buried for good reasons. I've lived with lies my whole life, I said. I need the truth, even if it hurts worse than what I already know. The next day, I hired a private investigator named Carmen Rodriguez, who specialized in finding birth parents. Her office was above a bail bondsman in a part of downtown I usually avoided, but her walls were covered with success stories and certificates that made her look more legitimate than her location suggested. Carmen was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes who'd been doing this work for 20 years. She had me fill out detailed forms about everything I knew, every scrap of information Mom and Dad had revealed about Mitchell and Crystal. She took copies of the DNA results and promised to start searching immediately. Finding birth parents isn't always a happy ending, she warned me, leaning back in her creaky office chair. Sometimes people don't want to be found. Sometimes they're not who you hope they'll be. Sometimes the truth is harder to live with than the lies. They can't be worse than the people who raised me, I said. Carmen studied me for a moment. You'd be surprised what people are capable of, but I'll do my best to find out what really happened. The investigation cost $500 upfront plus daily fees that added up quickly, but I'd been saving money for years, never having anyone to spend it on. While other people my age were going out with friends or taking vacations, I'd been working constantly and living on ramen to build up an emergency fund that was about to get a lot smaller. 3 weeks later, Carmen called with news that would change everything I thought I knew about my origin story. I found her, she said. Crystal Morrison. She's alive, living in Portland, Oregon. But there's something you should know before you contact her. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. What? She's been looking for you too, for years. According to the records I found, police reports, court documents, she never abandoned you voluntarily. The story Carmen uncovered made me physically ill. Crystal had been 17 when she had me, kicked out by her ultra-religious parents for getting pregnant outside marriage. She'd been working at a diner, living in a studio apartment that cost most of her paycheck, trying to finish high school through night classes while pregnant. Uncle Mitchell had seemed like a hero when he offered to help, a place to stay, someone to take care of her, support during the pregnancy and after. He was older, seemed responsible, promised to help her get back on her feet, but he'd been using her from the beginning, for money when her part-time job provided any, for sex when he wanted it, regardless of her consent, for whatever he needed to feed his growing drug habit and gambling debts. She'd been trapped, isolated from anyone who might help her, completely dependent on someone who saw her as an object rather than a person. When I was 6 months old, he disappeared with me while Crystal was at work at the diner, leaving only a note saying he was taking me somewhere safe, somewhere I could have a better life than what she could provide. She'd come home to an empty apartment and her baby gone. She'd spent the next 2 years searching frantically, filing police reports, hiring lawyers she couldn't afford with money scraped together from double shifts, and borrowed from the few friends who hadn't abandoned her. She'd called every hospital, every social services office, every police station in 3 states. She'd posted flyers with my baby picture on telephone poles and bulletin boards, hoping someone would recognize me. The trail went cold when Uncle Mitchell moved across the state with me, using fake identification and cash-only transactions to stay off the grid. By the time Crystal tracked down his last known address, we were already gone. She never stopped looking, even after she got married and had other children, even when the lawyers told her the chances were slim, even when everyone said she should move on with her life and accept that I was probably better off wherever I'd ended up. I called the number Carmen gave me with hands that shook so badly I had to dial 3 times. Hello? The voice was warm, cautious, with a slight Oregon accent I couldn't place. Is this Crystal Morrison? Yes, who's calling? I took a deep breath that felt like it might be my last. This is going to sound crazy, but I think you're my mother. My name is River, and I was born on October 15th, 2000. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I was about to check if the call had dropped when I heard crying, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like 23 years of grief pouring out at once. River? She whispered, her voice breaking on my name. My baby River? Yeah, I said, tears streaming down my face. It's me. We talked for 3 hours that first night. She told me about the night I was taken, about the years of searching, about the detective work she'd done trying to track down Mitchell's family. She told me about the other children she'd had, my half-siblings, and how she'd never stopped thinking about me, wondering if I was safe, if I was happy, if I even knew her name. She'd named me River because she wanted me to always find my way back to her, like water always finds the ocean. I kept your baby blanket, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The one I knitted when I was pregnant. It's yellow because I didn't know if you'd be a boy or girl. I wanted you to have it when you came home. I never gave up hope that someday you'd come home. 2 weeks later, I flew to Portland using money I'd saved for a car. Crystal picked me up at the airport and I recognized her immediately. I had her eyes, the same shade of green that looked almost gold in certain light. Her nose, small and slightly upturned. Her stubborn chin that I'd always thought made me look defiant in photos. For the first time in my life, I looked like someone. She was smaller than I'd expected, barely 5 feet tall, with curly brown hair that she kept trying to smooth down nervously. She was crying before I even got off the plane, and when she hugged me in the arrivals area, it felt like something inside me that had been broken my entire life suddenly clicked into place. She introduced me to my half-siblings, Sage, who was 15 and looked exactly like me at that age, and Aspen, who was 12 and had Crystal's curly hair and my stubborn streak. They'd grown up knowing about me, seeing my baby picture on Crystal's dresser, hoping their big sister would come home someday. We always set a place for you at Thanksgiving, Sage said shyly, as we sat in their kitchen eating homemade soup that tasted better than anything from my childhood. Mom said maybe this year you'd finally be there. Crystal had become an elementary school teacher, specializing in kids who came from troubled homes. She'd married a man named David when Sage was 2, a carpenter who'd helped her search for me and who talked about me like I'd already been part of their family for years. Your mom showed me your picture on our first date, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. Told me she had a daughter she was going to find someday. I knew if I wanted to be with her, I'd need to be ready to love you too. They lived in a modest house in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. The walls were covered with family photos that included school pictures of me that Crystal had somehow obtained, artwork from Crystal's students, and certificates from teaching awards she'd won. Sage's guitar leaned against the living room wall, and Aspen's watercolor paintings covered every surface of the refrigerator. It was everything my childhood had lacked: warmth, creativity, unconditional love, the sense that everyone who lived there was wanted and valued. "I need to ask you something," I said to Crystal on my last night there. We were sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies and drinking tea that tasted like home. "Why didn't you try to contact the family who raised me? Surely you could have tracked them down eventually?" Her face darkened, and I saw a flash of anger that reminded me of myself when I was cornered. "I did find them. When you were about 8 years old, I hired a lawyer and everything, spent money I didn't have." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Your father, the man who raised you, threatened to have me arrested for harassment. He said you were happy and well-adjusted, and that contact with your biological mother would only confuse and hurt you. He said if I really loved you, I'd leave you alone and let you have a normal life." I felt sick. He knew you were looking for me? The whole time. I sent letters, birthday cards, Christmas presents. I called on your birthday every year until you turned 18, hoping someone would tell you I was trying to reach you. The lawyer said there was nothing else I could legally do since Mitchell had never been legally declared your guardian, and there was no paper trail of the kidnapping. "They never told me," I said, my voice barely audible. "There's more," Crystal said gently, reaching for my hand. "I kept copies of everything. Would you like to see?" She led me to her bedroom and opened a cedar chest that sat at the foot of her bed. Inside were hundreds of letters, cards, and wrapped presents spanning 23 years. Birthday gifts for every age I'd been, each one carefully chosen and lovingly wrapped. Christmas presents that would have meant everything to a lonely child. Letters telling me about her life, asking about mine, expressing love for a daughter she'd never stopped missing. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every first day of school," she said softly. "I never forgot. I never stopped hoping." I sobbed reading through them. The woman who'd raised me had told me no one wanted me, that I should be grateful for what little love I could scrape together. Meanwhile, my real mother had been fighting to reach me my entire life. There were birthday cards for ages I barely remembered, filled with wishes that I was healthy and happy and loved. Christmas presents chosen with a mother's intuition. Art supplies because she'd somehow heard I liked to draw. Books because she hoped I loved reading as much as she did. Journals because she thought I might like to write. Letters describing her life, her marriage to David, the birth of my siblings, always with the hope that someday I'd be there to share it all. "The hardest part," she said, holding a letter dated for my 18th birthday, "was not knowing if you were okay, if you were loved, if you even knew my name or that I existed." There was a photo album filled with pictures she'd taken of places she thought I might like. Museums, parks, art galleries, all with notes about wanting to take me there someday. There were newspaper clippings she'd saved about achievements by other kids my age, wondering if I was doing similar things. There were Christmas ornaments she'd bought each year with my name on them, hung on a tree in a house I'd never seen. When I flew back home, I had a choice to make. I could quietly rebuild my life with my real family and let the people who'd raised me continue their lie. Or I could burn their world down the way they'd burned mine. I chose option 3. I spent the next month gathering evidence like I was building a legal case. I made copies of every letter Crystal had saved, every card, every piece of proof that showed my parents had deliberately kept me from my biological mother who'd been searching for me. I researched the legal implications of what they'd done, consulted with lawyers about parental kidnapping and custodial interference, though the statute of limitations had long since passed. Then I planned my revenge. I invited the whole extended family over for Sunday dinner. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone who treated me like a second-class citizen my whole life, while treating Theo and Vera like golden children who could do no wrong. "I want to cook for everyone," I told Mom when I called. "A thank you dinner for all the years of love and support." She was so surprised by my apparent gratitude that she agreed immediately. I spent all day cooking, the same dishes they served at every family gathering, the same food I'd helped prepare for years while being excluded from the conversations and celebrations. I set the table with Mom's good china, the set that was only used for special occasions, and placed the cedar chest in the center like a centerpiece. "I have an announcement," I said when everyone was gathered around the dining room table, the same table where I'd eaten countless silent meals feeling like an intruder. I placed my hand on the cedar chest and looked around at all the faces that had never quite accepted me as family. "For 23 years, you've all known I wasn't really part of this family. What you didn't know is that my real mother has been trying to contact me this entire time." Mom's face went pale. Dad started to stand up, probably to shut me down the way he had my entire childhood. "Sit down," I said firmly. "You've had 23 years to talk. Now it's my turn." I opened the chest and started pulling out letters, arranging them across the table like evidence in a trial. "This woman, my real mother, fought for me while you were treating me like garbage because I reminded you of someone I barely knew," I said, my voice steady despite the rage coursing through me. I read select passages from Crystal's letters. Her joy when I took my first steps, which she'd learned about from a private investigator she'd hired with money she couldn't afford. Her pride when she heard through the same investigator that I'd made honor roll in high school. Her heartbreak when she missed my graduation because she wasn't told about it, even though she'd called the school directly and been told parents hadn't requested tickets for me. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Aunt Patricia crying. Every birthday, this woman sent me presents that I never received. Every Christmas, she wrote me letters that I never saw. Every year, she called hoping to speak to me, and you hung up on her. Uncle Robert was reading one of the letters over his wife's shoulder, his face growing redder by the minute. "I wanted you all to know that I've found my real family," I continued. "People who actually love me, who wanted me, who never made me feel like a burden or a charity case." I stood up and grabbed my purse. the same cheap purse I'd carried for 3 years because I couldn't afford to replace it while working to pay for my education. I'm changing my name back to what my mother gave me. I'm moving to Portland to be near people who actually care about me, and I never want to see any of you again. As I walked toward the door, Mom called out, her voice desperate and shaking. We raised you. We gave you everything. I turned back one last time. You gave me a roof and food and emotional neglect. My real mother gave me unconditional love from a distance for 23 years. Guess which one mattered more? Uncle Frank, who'd always ignored me at family gatherings, spoke up. That's pretty ungrateful considering everything they did for you. I laughed, and it came out sharp and bitter. Ungrateful? I spent my entire childhood trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it to me. The only thing I'm grateful for is that I finally know why. Aunt Patricia was sobbing now, probably realizing how she'd treated me over the years, how she'd always favored Theo and Vera in gift-giving and attention. We didn't know, she said through her tears. You didn't want to know, I corrected. There's a difference. You saw how they treated me differently, and you said nothing. You participated in making me feel like I didn't belong. Cousin Michelle, who'd always acted superior because she was Theo's age and they'd bonded over being the normal cousins, finally spoke up. Maybe if you hadn't been so difficult all the time. Difficult. I cut her off. I was difficult because I was a child who didn't understand why her family didn't love her. I was difficult because I was trying to survive in a house where affection was conditional, and I never knew what the conditions were. I left them sitting around that table with the evidence of their deception and cruelty spread out before them like accusations they couldn't deny. 6 months later, I moved to Portland permanently. Crystal helped me find an apartment near their house. A cozy one-bedroom with hardwood floors and windows that actually let in light. The kind of place I'd dreamed of living in but never thought I could afford. Crystal co-signed the lease when my credit wasn't quite good enough on its own, and David helped me move my few possessions across the country in his truck. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever helped me with anything major. I got a job at a pediatric clinic, working with kids who reminded me of myself, the ones who seemed a little lost, a little sad, a little different from their siblings. I understood what it felt like to be the child who didn't quite fit, and I made sure every kid who came through our doors felt seen and valued. Sage and Aspen became the siblings I'd always wanted. We had weekly family dinners where everyone actually talked to each other, where laughter was genuine, where no one kept score of who deserved love. We celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes and thoughtful gifts chosen because someone had actually paid attention to what you liked. David taught me to fix my car, patiently showing me how to change oil and replace brake pads while including me in all the dad jokes I'd missed growing up. You're terrible at this, I told him after he'd spent 20 minutes explaining why a particular wrench joke was supposed to be funny. That's the point, he said with a grin. Dad jokes are supposed to be terrible. It's in the official dad manual. Page 1, Section A. All jokes must be grown-worthy. Crystal and I took art classes together, something she'd always wanted to do with her daughter. We went to museums and galleries, took weekend trips to see art installations, spent hours talking about color and composition and what made something beautiful. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Last month, Mom called me for the first time since that dinner. I almost didn't answer. I'd blocked most of their numbers, but she was calling from her work phone. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice small and uncertain. For what specifically? I asked, sitting down on my couch that I'd bought with my own money in my own apartment, surrounded by photos of people who actually loved me. For everything. For not telling you the truth. For treating you differently. For keeping you from your mother. Why now? I asked. Vera's pregnant, she said, and I could hear her crying. She's terrified something will happen to the baby, that someone might take it away from her. She asked me how I could live with myself, knowing I'd kept someone else's baby from them. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the irony that it had taken Vera's pregnancy to make any of them understand what they'd done to Crystal. I hope she has a healthy baby, I said finally, and I hope she never has to wonder if her child feels loved. We did love you, Mom said softly. No, I replied. You tolerated me. You fed me and housed me and made sure I didn't die on your watch. But you never loved me. Love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't make you prove your worth every single day. Love doesn't treat you like you're contaminated by someone else's mistakes. We were scared, she said. Mitchell had destroyed so much. We didn't want you to turn out like him, so you decided to destroy me instead, I said calmly. You decided that withholding love was better than risking that I might develop problems. You created the very thing you were afraid of, a child who felt unwanted and unloved. I hung up and never answered when she called again. Crystal and I are planning a trip to Europe next year, something she'd always dreamed of doing with her daughter. We're going to visit art museums in Paris, eat gelato in Italy, and take pictures in front of famous landmarks. All the things mothers and daughters do together when they have time to make up for. Sage is applying to colleges, and she wants me to help her with essays. She's considering pre-med, inspired by hearing about my career and the way I work with children. Aspen painted a portrait of our whole family for Christmas. Me, Crystal, David, her, and Sage, with all of us sitting around their kitchen table, which is where we spend most of our time together. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if Uncle Mitchell hadn't taken me, if I'd grown up with Crystal from the beginning. But then I think about all the lonely kids in the pediatric clinic who light up when I sit with them, who trust me because I understand what it feels like to be forgotten or overlooked. Maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. Maybe I needed to know what it felt like to be unwanted, so I could recognize real love when I found it, and so I could give that recognition to other children who needed it. 3 weeks ago, I legally changed my name to River Morrison. The judge asked if I was sure I wanted to cut ties with my adoptive family completely. They're not my family, I said. They never were. River Morrison. It feels like coming home to myself after 23 years of being lost. The people who raised me taught me that love had to be earned, that I was always one mistake away from losing what little affection I could scrape together. Crystal taught me that real love doesn't keep score, doesn't make you prove your worth, doesn't treat you like a burden or a problem to be managed. I'm 30 now, and I finally understand what family is supposed to feel like. I have people who celebrate my successes without comparing them to someone else's. I have siblings who text me random thoughts and inside jokes. I have parents who show up when I need them and who are proud of me just for being who I am. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to burn down everything you thought you knew to find out who you really are. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, the people who truly love you have been waiting for you to find your way back home all along.